Testing. How is it in the back? Good? Thank you, Jan, for the invite to come back once again. When I came in about 9:45, I walked in with Jan, and Judith was in the kitchen, and she stepped out and said, "Welcome home." And it felt right. I've been giving talks here for probably 10 years, and I always feel at home every time I come here. So it's a joy to be with all of you. So I'm watching the clock. Yeah. So the full title of this talk is Haunting Guests. Let me get it right. Haunting Ghosts to Healing Guests. And I hope the title will make sense as I begin. So here we are at the beginning of a new year. It's a perfect time to look back at 2023 and forward to the new season. It's early enough in the new year to feel the between space that we inhabit currently. Right now we're in between. We haven't really fully entered 2024, and we all have memories, as was witnessed here in the offerings, of 2023 and beyond that. So I've thought a great deal this last year or so about what haunts us. None of us can escape the nagging haunts or the persistent ghosts, the specters that continue to remind us of our imperfections, of where we have fallen short or have shortchanged our own potentials. As Jungian analyst James Hollis persuasively reminds us in his fine study that has influenced my thinking hugely, his book is entitled Hauntings, Dispelling the Ghosts Who Run Our Lives. We are, in the long and short run, haunted by something in our histories. If we didn't have histories, we wouldn't have hauntings. You can't have one without the other. Hauntings are basic to being human. As such, they carry a mythological inflection. Personal, local, national, global. Briefly stated, a myth is an expression of a value, a belief, an assumption, a prejudice, a way of grasping the world's particulars. There's no one in this room who is not living in a myth. Ask yourself regarding your own mythology. To what groups do I belong? What do I aspire to? What can I point to that gives my life value, coherence, and meaning? What am I passionate about? Answering any of these questions will put you in touch with your own mythology. I like to think of a mythology as a personal interior cosmology. It's a cosmology, but it's a cosmology in here. And for my topic this morning, a fundamental mythological question is contained in how I answer this question. What currently has for years, even decades, haunted me with unwelcome stories about myself, about others, about how I relate to my own shortcomings, failures, missed opportunities, or following my own bliss, my own passions? For many, what can occur later in life is a haunting sense that somehow I missed living my own life, fulfilling my own destiny, because I was sidetracked by distractions that kept me unreflective about who I actually am and what I have to offer the world. In short, many are haunted by the feeling that they miss their life's fundamental purpose for existing. So we can entertain the reality that our personal myth is never a done deal. It's always in motion. Hauntings can gnaw at us, wear us down, and wear us out. The ghosts that often carry these hauntings are mythological, psychological, and more often than not, spiritual. Here are a few of the areas that I and others have been haunted by. You choose those that fit you. Fear, anxiety, mortality, losing one's bearings, losing a sense of life having less meaning now than it did in the past, wounds from childhood that perhaps one has passed down to one's own children as a way not to have to confront them. Jung believed that what we don't confront, we pass to the children and have them do the work that we decided not to. And if they don't do it, it'll go to the next generation. That's what I mean by us being in a history. Sometimes they are chaperoned by feelings of not good enough, or I don't dare risk that, for I know I'll fail at it. And that's built in to individuals' narratives as a given. What we assume about ourselves, what we imagine about ourselves, can haunt us to the point that they define us as if these feelings and impressions expressed absolute truths. They don't, but we can believe that they do. If we uncover those feelings for a moment, we might discover that we are haunted by a need for certainty, for security. But these same hauntings can fix me in place, paralyze me, all in the service of staying snugly in my cocoon, where security in the familiar becomes our controlling mythic impulse. The need to feel secure, that's the top of my list of my myth. And by God, I'm not giving it up. But the paralysis that brings onto us is enormous. Yes, we live in our myths, but we also to recall that our myths live deeply within us. Where our core being struggles to make sense of a world in extreme flux and rapid change, that it can disassemble our myth, taking it apart one belief or one certainty at a time. We may awaken one day to discover that our personhood, that is a lived sense of who I am, is opaque, it's blurry, and it's too foggy to recognize. Now we can have days like that, and then things clear up. We can have weeks like that, and we can have years like that. That is what haunting feels like. For the ghosts that haunt us are felt senses of life in both their interior and exterior manifestations. So hauntings aren't of the intellect. Hauntings are about our feelings, about our felt sense of ourselves, excuse me, and our sense of self in relation to others. It can also be a moment of feeling an iciness about ourselves when we realize how much of our lives has been handed down to us to live, like a pair of hand-me-down jeans, dungarees, skirt, blouse, rather than allowing ourselves to slip and slide as we forge an original and authentic narrative whose plot is our own imprint, not copied from the newspaper or someone's opinion of us. And yet, to pick up the other side of this discussion just for a moment, hauntings can also appear in the form of a summons. See, hauntings can summon us to something. to show up more fully and with greater consciousness to our own journey, our own quest. I'm going to take a pause here for just a second. I hope that in what I have said thus far, it's become apparent that we are talking about concerns of the soul, the psyche, that region of our being, and not an intellectual exercise. I sense that what haunts us most forcefully and consistently is a call to awaken to the terms of our deeper, more authentic story, and to the myth that shapes that story into relevant actions in the world. And parentheses, if you've never seen the film Nomad with Frances McDormand, Sandy and I rewatched it the other night and were just blown away. It won the Best Picture in 2021, I think. And one of the things about getting older is that you go back to these things that you know you've seen and they're brand new. So it's like, a twofer. But that film is just magisterial in the life of one woman discovering her own authentic myth. It's brilliant. Now for another example that I hope will coalesce some of these remarks I've made on myth and the hauntings that can devour or liberate us from a life story that has outlived its usefulness and has become a cadaver within us. That is, a husk without meaning. I was raised in a family of 5 children. A sweet and caring mother and a quiet, reticent father who dutifully provided for us during the week by showing up at a job that gave him little, if any, satisfaction. But on the weekend, beginning on Friday late afternoon, as he walked from the bus stop home, he would stop at the pub at the end of our street, Locar's Tavern. I can't believe it, 70 years later, I can still remember the name of that joint, and begin drinking. This recreation would last until Sunday, when he would struggle to sober up enough to crawl to work on the bus that dropped him off close to his office in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. Now on the weekend, as he dove deeply into his drinking, he would become enraged and spill out all his frustrations, disappointments, all of his unlived life, much of these violent responses from a home life he suffered under with a domineering, emotionally abusive mother who picked on him much more than on her other 4 children. And his drinking brought on the rage of confusion because he didn't understand his own behavior. At our home, we waited in fits of anxiety for the shouting between him and our mother to begin on Saturday night, like clockwork. Along with the sounds of shattered plates and other destructions that mirrored the shattered marriage they had because of the ghost of alcoholism. I think alcoholism is a ghost. And there's others, but that particular addiction is one I'm familiar with. Now, this traumatic home life kept any of us from ever having friends over on the weekend. I have no memories of friends over on the weekend. We knew that the shrapnel would begin piercing the walls of our modest home in Euclid, Ohio, and wound the psyche of all of us. Most especially our mother, who took the brunt of these assaults weekend in and weekend out for decades. In brief, we grew up in a war zone, and the trauma that accompanied such a violence-laden household. We each would try in our own way to scatter on the weekends to friends or relatives' homes to avoid the whiplash of his maddened outbursts. Our personal myths were shaped by the hauntings of his disease. I just want you to hear that. Our personal myths were shaped by the hauntings of his disease that infiltrated into each of our lives, shaping them along its distorted and abusive contours. The remnants of these years still haunt several of us. It did for me until well into my adult years, when I began to read Buddhist psychologists and Al-Anon literature that gave direction and the wisdom to claim a life of serenity and inner peace. The efforts have been rewarded by making guests of the ghosts that haunted each of us, my three brothers and sister and I, with a fidelity I have seldom experienced in other forms. As I began reading about hauntings and thinking of the storyline that I wanted to shed in favor of one that more closely and accurately reflected my achievements, I came on a major revelation. I'm going to share that with you now. I never knew, for example, that when I began driving at age 16 and bought my own used cars, because I worked all through high school, paid my own way, bought the cars, because there was no money at home, that when I pulled into a gas pump to purchase gas, I could only fill the tank 1/4 way. No options. Filling it seemed an obscenity, an abusive form of indulgence. I began to see this modest approach to life generally as a pervasive habit of being in the world. It occurred to me one day in college that perhaps I had been living my life 1/4 full, not risking much, although I did in reality risk many adventures. But I did not make the connections to this preoccupation with little, just enough, not too much. You're not worthy of more. You see, the ghost of the alcoholic is living fiercely in me. My brothers and sister have their narratives, but I want to convey mine. On a retreat that lasted many months, several years ago, I spent much of the time reading and in contemplation and hiking in nature for 3.5 months. One night I began to wonder, have I passed on to our two sons, Matt, who's 50, and Steve, who's 45 currently, some of my own anger and frustration that I lived within for decades? See, I don't think you live with frustration and rage. I think you live within it. I think that's different. Yes, they said, when we talked honestly about it, they sensed my anger, my quick fuse, my being upset easily. We talked about how such hauntings can be intergenerational, passing down both the gifts and the grits from one generation to the next. I had metabolized my father's rage without the booze, revealing clearly to me and to our sons, one of whom has been a recovering alcoholic for 20 years, sober and off drugs, from ghost to guest. I have to go no further than my own son. And then, while preparing a talk to deliver in Ireland at a Jung conference last year, a gift was given to me. I had been living my life controlled by the myth of scarcity. You see, living by scarcity is a mythological way to live. Living with a feeling of abundance is a mythological way to live. Living a life of stinginess is a mythological way to live. Of living just enough, of putting gas in the tank just enough, not daring to risk something bigger. I lived small. The ghost of scarcity was my controlling myth, and it worked most effectively under the floorboards of consciousness, out of sight, where it congealed its greatest power. I know from my studies in mythology that a fully effective myth works best when it remains unconscious. Often, some disruption or big trouble might unseat the myth, and in an instant we see it clearly. I think that's happening with us nationally, but that would be another talk, wouldn't it? Here's an analogy to make it clearer, I hope. When the waters in which they swim, as their home is clear, fish do not see the water. They see by means of it. They can't see the water, but they see by means of the water. The water remains invisible. But when the water becomes polluted, becoming cloudy, murky, filled with debris, then fish see the water. They no longer can see by means of it, they see it itself. It becomes apparent through its pollution that it is present. While it has been present all the time, its clarity gave the water a way of seeing. Here then is the distinction between a myth and a mythology. A myth is what we live out. A mythology is the myth given shape and appearance through language, painting, sculpture, beautiful music, and other forms of expression. That's the mythology. Mythos, logos, the word mythology from mythologos, the speech of myth. And so I want to just say one more thing about it. Mythology is the stories we tell about our myth. Listen to any people having a conversation, HEB, on a plane, wherever. They're telling the other person their myth by the stories they're relating about themselves. Ghosts, when given another perspective to be seen by a transformed mythic perspective, can be something less to dispel than to host. This is where I've come down and disagree with Jim, who has taught me tons. Hosting former ghosts, now as guests, can reveal where we have further work to do. They are blessings rather than blisters on the soul, if one's vision is altered to welcome them. You've got to be open to it. This is what I hope for each of you here. To shift the warring element of the ghost into a positive energy as a guest that can reveal hot spots of vulnerability in us and change by means of that new knowing. So I wish not to dispel them, but to integrate them into a life where compassion for their existence is alive and authentic. From haunting ghost to welcome guest signifies a major shift in the myth that one is living. I end with a poem that a good friend sent me a while back. I think it's pertinent to this moment of listening to and heeding the wisdom of the haunting. And it was already resonant in earlier part of today's service. The title of the poem is When Someone Listens to You. And it's by a poet that I did not know, John Fox. Here's what he writes. When someone deeply listens to you, it's like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. When it balances on top of the brim, you are understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life. And the place where you wrote your first poem begins to glow in your mind's eye. It's as if gold has been discovered. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home, within you. Let the lead of the haunt transform into the gold of the guest. Your life will be richer with such a significant transformation when you welcome your guests, when you welcome your ghosts home.